If one were to identify the most radical artistic revolution of the 20th century, it would not be found in the chaotic gestural violence of the Expressionists, nor in the dream logic of the Surrealists, nor even in the ready-mades of Duchamp. It belongs rather to a man who spent 4 decades methodically eliminating everything from his canvas except straight lines, primary colors, and right angles. PIET Mondrian stands today as perhaps the most misunderstood giant of modern art. His legacy has been tragicomically reduced to a decorative motif. Walk into any high-street fashion retailer or museum gift shop, and you will find his life's work plastered onto coffee mugs, socks, and hair conditioner bottles, stripped of meaning and reduced to stylish geometry. Yet, this Dutch painter did not spend 40 years in a monastic struggle with the nature of reality just to end up as a pattern for kitchen tiles. His journey from a traditional painter of misty riverbanks to the architect of the absolute represents nothing less than a complete reimagining of what painting could be, and more importantly, what it could mean for the structure of human perception. To truly understand Mondrian, one must first discard the popular notion that abstract art arises from a desire to invent new forms. For Mondrian, it was the exact opposite. He was not an inventor, he was an investigator. His trajectory was one of relentless subtraction, a surgical removal of everything he deemed accidental, temporary, or tragic in the appearance of the world, until only the indestructible remained. He did not seek to add to the world, but to strip it bare. Born Peter Cornelis Mondrian in 1872 in Amersfoort, in a Calvinist Holland where moral rectitude and clarity were non-negotiable virtues, his beginnings were deceptively conventional. His father was a strict headmaster, a man of rigid principles, and this upbringing instilled in the young PIET a lifelong obsession with discipline and order. His early training at the Academy of Fine Arts in Amsterdam placed him firmly within the tradition of the Hague School. Somber landscapes, heavy skies, the diffuse northern light reflecting off stagnant canals. However, a forensic examination of these early works reveals that the seed of the grid was already planted. Unlike his contemporaries who sought to capture the atmosphere or the mood of a scene, the romantic interplay of shadow and light, Mondrian was obsessed with the architecture of the landscape. In his canvases from the turn of the century, tree trunks are not merely wood, they are vertical vectors. The horizon of the Dutch polders is not just the edge of the land, it is an absolute line dividing the cosmos into 2 distinct realms, the earth and the sky. He was already seeking the order underlying the chaos of nature. The Netherlands itself, with its artificially constructed topography, flat and dissected by rectilinear canals and drainage ditches, was his first instructor in geometry. It is a country created by the line, reclaimed from the sea through engineering, a landscape where the vertical of the windmill and the church spire intersects the relentless horizontal of the land. The rupture began to manifest around 1908, catalyzed by his encounter with the work of Jan Turop and the Luminists. The somber browns and grays of the Rembrandt tradition gave way to electric blues, carmine reds, and vibrant yellows. Yet color was merely a tool. The true battlefield was form and the spiritual implication of that form. This period coincided with his deepening involvement in theosophy, a spiritual movement popularized by Helena Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner. Theosophy posited that the material world is an illusion, a veil hiding a superior spiritual reality governed by laws of universal harmony. For Mondrian, who joined the Theosophical Society in 1909, art became the vehicle to access this reality. The series of tree paintings executed between 1908 and 1913 serves as the most fascinating visual document of this metamorphosis. It is a step-by-step manual on how to dismantle an object. It begins with the red tree, still recognizable, twisted, almost gothic in its angst, the branches writhing like flames against a blue night. It advances to the gray tree, where the branches dissolve into a network of black lines that suffocate the background, eliminating traditional depth. Here, the distinction between the object and the space around it begins to collapse. Finally, it culminates in the flowering apple tree, where the tree as a botanical object has vanished entirely. What remains are arcs and lines, visual rhythms suggesting growth and expansion, but no longer describing a specific object. Mondrian was no longer painting a tree. He was painting the vital force that allows the tree to exist. He was painting the verb, not the noun. In 1911, Mondrian moved to Paris and dropped an A from his surname, signaling a new international identity. In the French capital, Cubism was exploding. Mondrian absorbed the shock, but his reaction was singular. While Picasso and Braque used Cubist fragmentation to analyze objects, a guitar, a bottle, a face, ultimately remaining realistic painters interested in volume and weight, Mondrian saw in Cubism a fire escape from material reality. He realized, however, that the Cubists had not gone far enough. They were still tethered to the anecdote, to the particular object. They fragmented the wine bottle, but they still painted the wine bottle. Mondrian wanted the universal. He began painting building facades and scaffolding, subjects that offered a ready-made orthogonal grid. By 1913 and 1914, his compositions had become tangles of black and ochre lines where the distinction between figure and background was abolished. Renaissance depth, the illusion that a painting is a window into the world, was sealed shut. The painting had become a wall, an autonomous reality. These plus and minus paintings, inspired by the rhythm of the ocean hitting a pier, reduced the crashing waves to a series of perpendicular dashes. The chaos of the sea was tamed into a binary code of vertical and horizontal strokes. Returning to the Netherlands to visit family just as the First World War broke out, Mondrian found himself trapped by the conflict. Isolated from the Parisian avant-garde, he settled in the artist colony of Laren. It was here, in the crucible of isolation, that he crystallized his theory. Alongside the charismatic propagandist Theo van Doesburg and the painter Bart van der Lek, he founded the De Stijl movement in 1917. It was here that he formulated the principles of neoplasticism, or the new structuring of visual reality. Crucially, the influence of Bart van der Lek was instrumental in Mondrian's adoption of primary colors. Van der Lek was using flat planes of red, yellow, and blue, and Mondrian saw in this the ultimate reduction of the spectrum. If the vertical and horizontal were the reduction of all form, then the primaries were the reduction of all light. However, it is a common error to assume that the iconic Mondrian style appeared fully formed in 1917. It did not. The works from 1917 to 1919 were experimental, featuring floating rectangles on white backgrounds or modular grids with softer colors. He experimented with a diamond-based grid in works like Composition with Grid 9, where the entire canvas is a regularized grid, eliminating any hierarchy between center and periphery. It was only around 1920 and 1921, back in Paris, that the classic vocabulary was fully refined. Thick black lines extending to the edge of the canvas, locking in planes of saturated primary color and white. The rules became dogmatic. Only straight lines, only horizontal and vertical orientations, only the three primary colors, red, yellow, blue, plus the non-colors, black, white, gray. No symmetry was permitted, for symmetry is static and dead. Equilibrium had to be dynamic, achieved through the tension of unequal elements. Why this obsession with the right angle? For Mondrian, the vertical line represented the active principle, the spiritual, the masculine, the ray of sun. The horizontal line represented the passive principle, the material, the feminine, the horizon of the earth. The intersection of these two lines at 90 degrees was not merely geometry. It was the representation of cosmic equilibrium, the reconciliation of opposites. It was the visual manifestation of the universal harmony that Theosophy promised. Any other line, the curve, the diagonal, introduced tragedy, subjective emotion, and disorder. The curve was individual. The straight line was universal. To paint a curve was to succumb to the accidents of nature. To paint a right angle was to align oneself with the absolute. Here lies the point where the casual observer often fails to grasp the magnitude of the work. There is a widespread belief that Mondrian's paintings are mechanical executions, technical drawings filled in with industrial paint. Nothing could be further from the truth. To stand before an actual Mondrian is to experience a profound physical intimacy with the material. He was not a minimalist in the sense of doing less. He was a maximalist of concentration. He rarely used rulers for the final execution of the lines. While he employed tapes or strips of paper to plan the composition, moving them around for days or weeks to find the perfect tension, the black lines themselves were painted freehand with excruciating precision. They are not outlines, they are planes in themselves. Mondrian constructed the painting organically. He did not simply draw a grid and fill it in. Often the color planes were painted first, and the black lines were added later, or vice versa, in a process of constant push and pull. X-ray analyses and unfinished works reveal that he would move a black line a few millimeters to the right or left, scraping away the paint and repainting, seeking the exact weight required for the composition to lock into place. Furthermore, the whites were never just white. Mondrian mixed minute quantities of blue, yellow, or gray into his white pigments to create different temperatures of light within the same canvas. A white plane next to a red one might be slightly cooler to recede, while a white surrounded by black lines might be warmer to advance. He treated the white areas as active forms, not empty space. The surface of the paint bears the marks of the brush. He alternated the direction of his brush strokes, vertical on vertical planes, horizontal on horizontal ones, to catch the light differently. The painting breathes. It has a pulse. It is the record of human imperfection struggling to achieve a Platonic ideal. The edges of the color planes often stop just shy of the black lines, or slightly overlap, creating a physical topography on the canvas surface. These are handmade objects, sweating with effort. Mondrian's ideological rigidity was tested in the mid-1920s when his colleague Theo van Doesburg proposed elementarism, introducing the diagonal line into painting to express dynamism. Mondrian viewed this as an unforgivable betrayal. The diagonal, to him, was a return to naturalism, to perspective, to emotional instability. It was the reintroduction of the chaos he had spent years exercising. He broke with de Stijl and severed ties with van Doesburg. This was not an aesthetic dispute. It was a religious schism. Interestingly, Mondrian found a solution for dynamism without violating his principles: the lozenge paintings. He rotated the physical canvas 45 degrees, but kept the painted lines rigorously vertical and horizontal relative to gravity. The result is electrifying. The lines cut the edge of the canvas, suggesting that the grid continues infinitely outward, that the painting is merely a cropped section of a much larger universal order. By cropping the composition, he implied that the harmony he created was not contained within the frame, but was part of a limitless continuum. His studio in Paris at 26 Rue de Départ became legendary. It was not just a workspace, it was an immersive installation, a habitable painting. He covered the walls with rectangular colored cards, which he moved constantly to test new spatial relationships. Furniture was painted or covered to eliminate curves. An artificial flower, painted white to hide the natural green of the leaves, which he detested as too natural, decorated the room. He sat with his back to the window to avoid looking at the messy, uncontrolled nature outside. Visitors described the sensation of entering a sanctuary of silence and clarity, a refuge from the dirty chaos of Paris. There, Mondrian lived a monastic routine, eating simple meals, working while the daylight lasted, and listening to jazz on his gramophone. He loved the Charleston and the foxtrot, dancing alone, stiffly and angularly, to absorb the syncopated rhythm that began to influence his work. The rise of fascism and the outbreak of the Second World War forced Mondrian to flee, first to London in 1938. In London, he befriended Ben Nicholson and Barbara Hepworth, influencing the course of British abstraction. But the war followed him. The windows of his Hampstead studio were shattered by the blast of German bombs. In 1940, he boarded a ship for New York City. At 68 years old, Mondrian could have settled into repetition. Instead, the American metropolis rejuvenated him violently. New York was the concrete materialization of his theories. The grid of the streets, the vertical skyscrapers, the frenetic pace, the neon lights. It was the New Jerusalem of neoplasticism. And there was Boogie Woogie, the fast, percussive piano jazz he adored. He immersed himself in the culture, befriending Peggy Guggenheim and the young American abstract artists. In the New York works, the black line, which had been the anchor of his work for 2 decades, began to disintegrate. First, in works like New York City 1, He used colored adhesive tapes to create interlaced lines, eliminating black entirely. The lines were now yellow, red, and blue, passing over and under each other, creating an unprecedented optical depth. The tape allowed him to edit the composition instantly, moving lines with a speed that matched the city's tempo. But the final revolution came with Broadway Boogie Woogie and the unfinished Victory Boogie Woogie. Here, the continuous line disappears completely. The grid is formed by small blocks of pure color, visual staccatos that blink like traffic lights or illuminated windows at night. The painting vibrates. It is visualized music. European asceticism gave way to American exuberance. Mondrian was no longer seeking only the static harmony of the universe. He had found harmony in movement, in the pulsation of modern life. He destroyed his most sacred rule, the continuous black line, to arrive at an even greater truth. The dynamic equilibrium was no longer a state of rest, but a state of active, vibrating tension. Mondrian died of pneumonia in 1944, leaving Victory Boogie Woogie on his easel. It remains a diamond-shaped canvas covered in small pieces of colored tape and painted sections, a testament to his process of eternal revision. He worked until the very end, pushing the boundaries of a language he had invented. The legacy of Mondrian is ubiquitous, yet his essence remains rare. Modern architecture, the international style, minimalist graphic design, Swiss typography, all drink from the well of neoplasticism. The clean lines of the Bauhaus, the glass curtain walls of skyscrapers, the layout of magazines, the visual syntax of the 20th century was largely written in Mondrian's dialect. However, the superficial appropriation of his aesthetics often ignores the profound ethical and spiritual dimension of his project. Mondrian believed that by purifying vision, art could purify humanity. He believed that if we could learn to see the universal relationships rather than the particular conflicts, we could achieve a higher state of existence. He envisioned a future where art would dissolve into life, where the environment itself would be so harmonious that painting would no longer be necessary. We have not reached that utopia. Instead, we have taken his map to utopia and used it to sell merchandise. To look at a Mondrian today requires a deliberate act of breaking. One must resist the speed of the modern image. These paintings demand time. They are not logos. Stand in front of one for 10 minutes, and the optical physics begin to work. The colors begin to oscillate, the lines begin to push and pull, the space opens up. It is a perceptual workout, a cleansing of the eye. Mondrian did not paint for decoration. He painted to create a space where the mind could encounter the absolute. In a world drowning in visual noise, his silence is not empty. It is full of a terrifying, beautiful precision. He remains the great radical, the man who dared to think that a red square, a yellow square, and a blue square could hold the weight of the entire universe. He proved that limitation is not a lack of freedom, but the very condition of it. By restricting his means, he expanded his consciousness and offered us a lens through which to see the hidden structure of our own reality. The tragedy is not that he is on a coffee mug. The tragedy is that we look at the mug and fail to see the revolution.